Father, as we dive into this Bible survey class, I continue to just pray for your Holy Spirit's presence, for you to be our teacher. God, I just thank you for this time to go through the whole Bible, increasing our familiarity and just understanding of the big picture of Scripture, the great story as the speakers who were listening to the little lectures, as they called it. So yeah, we just pray that you would make this time profitable as well as we discuss that first section and then move on to Genesis 12 through 50. We just give ourselves to you, God, and we come with expectation that you will make this time valuable, that our investment of our time and effort will be rewarded, Lord. So thank you for that. And we continue to take authority over anything that would try to interfere. We just want to hear from you, Jesus. Yeah, pray all these things in Jesus' name. Well, let's just take a quick few minutes, just discuss what we talked or what we read last time. Anything that stuck out to you guys in that section, Genesis 1 through 11? Highlights, maybe even questions. I may not have the answers to them, but yeah, it's important to come away with good questions.
Referring to Genesis 1:26 and 3:22 in particular, he uses the phrase us and our. Is this the root Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit? He's talking in reference of.
Many would suggest that. I've also heard like one Old Testament professor that I had in particular kind of challenged that with the understanding that the original audience had no concept necessarily for that Trinity, and so maybe that's not necessarily what's implied there. But my kind of response to that is, well, what other concept did they have to understand that? You know, maybe there was something else. He didn't seem to provide an alternative understanding to that. So I'm like, the Trinity is probably our best guess.
Yeah, and not only Trinity, but it sounded like a council again. Yeah.
Us, we,
Our sounded like a council.
Yeah, and that's that. There's been some that would suggest that maybe it's more than just the Trinity, of a broader heavenly council. I kind of take that with a grain of salt for now. That very well may be. I certainly haven't been there and not sure what all goes on up there, but there are, I guess I would say there's at least one passage that could support that, kind of a broader council. But so, yeah.
well, John talks about Christ at the beginning.
Well, yeah, certainly the Trinity is there, and I think that's our best guess.
That's how I got that.
But as far as a broader council, more than just the Trinity, we do see that, and I believe it's, no, I'm not sure. I'm going to say Isaiah, but I don't think that's actually right. So maybe a council more than just the Trinity, but good. Other questions or takeaways?
Yes.
Yeah, keep rolling there, Dale.
Word study on the word us, and with the exception of Genesis 11:7, that before Genesis 3:22, the word us pointed to the Trinity. Then after the exception of 3:22, the word us pertained to us. Let us make the Tower of Babel. Let us do this. Where before it was us, meaning the Trinity.
Right.
Where once we came from the fall, it then came from us, the Trinity, to us trying to do it in and of ourselves. Is
Interesting.
that what I'm to take away from that?
I mean, I think that kind of goes along with the crisis part of it, right? So yeah. One other thing, just on that us of the Trinity, the word Elohim, which is the Hebrew that's translated God in those passages, is also plural. So that's kind of another little possibly Trinity hint, probably. But that kind of corresponds to that use of us, is even the word God in the original language is plural in many of those cases. So yeah, it's interesting stuff. Other thoughts or takeaways, questions? Dale, keep going.
Genesis 7:7 refers to they entered into the ark, but is this a foreshadowing of the later coming to our salvation, that we have refuge?
Yeah. So I forget who it is. It might be James, or in Hebrews, I forget, but there is at least one New Testament kind of connection point there of like
I remember that.
relating our salvation to the ark. So maybe the ark is a picture of Christ. Them entering into the ark might be us entering into Christ.
Exactly.
And that brings up a good point. As we're reading through the Old Testament, we should look for things pointing to Jesus, pointing forward to him.
I got that from the Bible study. What is this? How does this point forward?
Yeah.
And that's where remembering that there were scriptures referring to that, looking at that, pointing forward, using what we learned in that class.
Yeah.
Why wasn't no creature in the sea destroyed?
Why what?
When he talked about everything that was destroyed, he didn't mention anything in the seas. It was always everything that walked or creeped or flew.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he destroyed with water, so perhaps the sea creatures survived. I mean, I guess that stands to reason.
One other thing, and then I'm done. He talks about, I forget, I didn't write the scripture, but he talks in reference to 7 pairs of clean animals and 1 pair of unclean animals. 7 pairs of birds. Okay, I thought it was just 2 by 2.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was there was more than just that. There were
So what's the purpose of the unclean and the clean? There's got to be something for me to bring forward.
So
well, you sacrifice clean animals.
Sacrifice or maybe even eat clean animals. Now what's interesting is there's no record of God saying that, these are the only animals you're supposed to eat. We'll find that later on in, Leviticus, Exodus, I don't know, somewhere in there.
Come on,
yeah,
we're unclean. How do they know about the unclean animals yet? It's not into.
Yeah, so we don't know. Maybe God was also telling Noah,
like a foreshadowing,
which animals to eat, which animals to sacrifice. Maybe we're just not told that in scripture, but those were conversations that he had with Noah. But that's what we see later on, is those are the animals that either are sacrificed or eaten. So good questions. Anybody else have anything? I guess I'll just throw out one thought that came to me as we're reading, and then another question. One is, as we're reading over the curse of sin. Sorry, James, you have something to add?
Oh, no, I just realized that maybe.
There might be people outside.
Yeah.
So I know Nicole is coming Tuesdays and Thursdays. Carrie has the key, so
yeah, she's got.
not expecting anyone to be out there, but so when we were reading over the curse, so there was a curse for the serpent, a curse for the woman, a curse for the man. And I've just been thinking recently about what are the implications of Jesus coming to take away sin, what are the implications for that curse on our lives? You know, I just feel like God has been confirming to me, and you know, I don't know that there might be confirmation of this in the scriptures as well, but I'm just wondering, is that curse canceled in Christ? And I believe it is, but that's just something I've been kind of pondering and mulling over. You know, when we had our last baby, when we had Hope, you know, Amy's going through childbirth. I'm standing there next to her praying for her. And that kind of came to mind, you know, just, it shouldn't be this way. You know, this is a response, this is a result of sin. And I just believe that Jesus, you know, canceled that curse, if we will receive that from him by faith. So yeah, I really felt like that gave me faith to pray for her. And that delivery did seem to go well. And you know, she was able to do it without any pain relief and all that kind of thing. So anyways, that's just something I've been kind of mulling over. And then the other thing that's just weird, and we don't want to be too distracted by the weird stuff, you know, but it is interesting. The Nephilim, do you guys pick up on that? Talk about the Nephilim. So the sons of God, whoever they were, you know, came to the daughters of man. So most people would suggest these are fallen angels that are reproducing with human females and creating these kind of like giant, or you know, some kind of modified humans. Yeah, so there actually is, it actually says even after this, so like some would explain like Goliath or other giants in those times with these creatures, I guess, that we hear reference of. It's just interesting to me that they're called the sons of God, and I know that can be a title for angels, but it just surprises me that would be related to fallen angels.
Mm-hmm.
And this could play into a question that I've had about when exactly did they fall? I think most assume that happened before Adam and Eve. But it seems like maybe it happened later.
You know what?
So the question I have is, when were the fallen angels kicked out of heaven, basically? When did they fall? When did that happen? I think most people just assume that happened sometime before Adam and Eve. And so that's why Satan's already tempting Adam, you know, in the garden as a serpent. But it's not really clearly stated. And in fact, in Job, you have Satan still presenting himself to God, which to me suggests they have access to heaven, which is, my guess is that's because they haven't been kicked out of heaven yet.
Yeah, right.
And so possibly what we see in the book of Revelation, where, you know, it kind of tells that story of the dragon and a third of the stars, and there's a war in heaven, and then they're cast down to the earth. I just wonder if that happened at the ascension of Christ, you know, which is, I don't know that I've ever heard anyone suggest that, but to me, it would make sense of some of these things that we're seeing, like angels who apparently, my guess is they're not supposed to be, you know, doing this with women, but they're I would guess that, yeah, those were the angels who fell, but yet at this point, they're still called sons of God. They're still given that general term that angels often are given. And then, like I said, presenting himself to God in the story of Job. So anyways, just thoughts to kind of mull over.
Say that you could go to 20 years ago. You could drive to Crosbyton, Texas, almost Oklahoma, and you could go to a fossil store, a store that shows fossils and bones, and you can see a femur. It's like
Yeah,
8 or 9 feet long that looks just like us, suggesting that there was
giants in the land.
giants. I mean, you can actually see these bones and it was the legs down below, and of course, from the hip down. Part of 1 foot was there, but I didn't know what to make of that. I still don't.
I mean, we see giants in scripture, so
Yeah,
perhaps they were,
right.
so after the Tower of Babel, they're scattered throughout the earth.
Mhm.
And so apparently there's people and giants over here, maybe even through those early centuries that we see in the New Testament. Because I mean, you have a giant as late as David, so that's quite a bit later than, you know, that reference in
Well,
Genesis.
Description of the size that David was, that you could get a frame of reference as to how big he really was.
How big, you mean Goliath?
Goliath.
Yeah, there's a reference there. So I don't know how that would relate to that bone, but
he was a big man.
but yeah, he's definitely
Much bigger.
bigger than normal. And who knows if all the giants were that same size?
That's good.
There could have been bigger ones earlier, or who knows, you know?
David was, or not David, but Goliath was described in the Bible as 6 cubits in a span. Now, 6 cubits is like 18 inches, or 1 cubit is 18 inches, and a span is 4. So Goliath is approximately 19 foot tall.
Sounds like Robert Alton from
Way back.
Illinois.
Illinois, the world's tallest man. He's 9'4". I stood next to that guy's a life-size statue of this cat in Alton, Illinois. I mean, his shoes are like this.
Yeah, like Shaq shoes, like small.
But he was documented, he had a disease. He had
Like Andre the Giants.
like under the giant.
Yeah.
He had that hormonal. It's documented.
Yeah, Andre Giant had.
He never
Thyroid
stopped.
disease.
Yeah, he never stopped growing, including Robert Alton, or Ludlow. Robert Ludlow,
There's no, there's these statues in Illinois.
you can stand right next to it.
Illinois.
Oh, there was a mystery house.
6 cubits in a span. Wow. And David's like 5'2". You know,
Was it?
Yeah.
probably.
I don't know.
He's a teenager.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Jeez.
All right, well, we ready to dive into our next lecture here?
Okay, please forgive me.
Uh-huh.
Let me see if I understand this correctly. As we read this through, we write like stuff that we have come to.
Yeah, just any takeaways.
But then this over here where I have a full page, that's where I can fill in a lot more of like that assignment you were talking.
So
Please
this one was,
forgive me.
we went through it yesterday, any takeaways that you had from that first lecture, where they just did
Okay.
an overview? Now,
But then this was intended for,
as we read through the whole section, that's intended for any notes we'll take on that.
okay. But then this assignment, this is that you had given, that was something different.
So the quizzes that we took today, yeah, so we're basically just trying to do retrieval practice on what we covered. So like the one assignment was to recall all of these captions, so that Windows 12 one.
I'm sorry, okay.
So we're gonna try to commit those to memory,
Mhm.
just a way to, hang on to the big picture.
Mhm.
And then as we go, we're not necessarily trying to reduplicate these, but we're gonna try to give something like this. So like, for yesterday, we would write, Genesis 1-11 or, creation and crisis, whatever. And then what's the story? What's this chunk of the story? And we'll try to put that into words. So as we read through this, after we get through that, we're gonna wanna be able to summarize that in a short paragraph. So we're just trying to get a good handle on the big picture as we go through and read the whole Bible here. All right,
Open this up.
where'd my phone go?
Going 12 through 50.
Okay, so
correct?
now we're starting on Genesis 12. Probably won't get all the way through 50, but we'll see how it goes. No, we wouldn't have been able to get all the way through anyways. This will take us today and probably tomorrow. Okay, sorry.
Genesis 12.
No, so before we do that, we're gonna do our lecture that kind of summarizes
Right.
Genesis 12 through 50.
Oh, and then, never mind.
And if this guy's talking too fast, I can always slow it down. So let me know if you want me to slow him down a little bit.
No, do it again.
No. Did you do that?
Okay, here we go. Here we really go.
Well, welcome back. We're now moving on into chapter 2 entitled Covenant. God makes a promise and establishes a people. Remember, one of the things we want to do in this course is we want you to have a good, solid understanding of what the entire Bible is about. And when the course is over, we want you to be able to think through it and to be able to say, okay, here's how it starts in Genesis, and work your way all the way through. To try and help you with this, we've given you these long list of titles that start with C, or a C sound starting with K. And so we're going to review each time. That will help you to recount this, especially as we move through the Old Testament. So here at the beginning is pretty easy, but as we move along, it'll get a little more complicated, and we'll need you to work at it a little more. So remember what we did last time. The Bible started out with creation. God created a wonderful world for which people can live, and then a crisis. People make 4 boneheaded mistakes. They sin and rebel against God. They get kicked out of the garden. They lose that close fellowship with God. And now they're outside the garden where death is. And so the Bible now is going to move. God is going to intervene into human history to try and reestablish that relationship they had in the garden, to try and bring people back into a close fellowship relationship with his presence. And he's going to do this largely through this idea of covenant. So we had creation and crisis, now followed by covenant. And this is really where the big grand story of salvation is going to begin. Keep in mind where we are in the Bible. We're in the Pentateuch. Some people call it the Torah. The Jews will refer to it as the Torah. This is the first 5 books of the Bible. So the Pentateuch is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We're still in Genesis, and in this session we'll cover till the end of Genesis. The Pentateuch merely means the 5 books, but it's these first 5 books of the Bible. So what's going to happen now is God has created the generic kind of Adam and Eve. There's not any specific tribe or ethnic group. We saw in Genesis 10 and 11, people are scattered into all of these groups. And now in Genesis 12, God is going to call this man Abram, rename him Abraham. Abram just means exalted father, and he renames him Abraham, father of a multitude. Abraham is living up in northwest Mesopotamia. He's in Mesopotamia, and God comes and calls him. And now the salvation story is going to focus through Abraham and through his descendants, is how most of the story is going to be tracked as we move on through the Old Testament. So when we come to Genesis 12, God is going to call Abraham, and he's going to make several promises to him. First, he's going to tell Abraham to leave the land where he is and to go to the land that God tells him to go to. Abraham's not sure exactly where they're going, but he's going to be obedient. But the promise to Abraham is going to be three things. He's going to promise them a land, that there will be a land that will be special for Abraham. And then number two, he promises him descendants, many descendants. He uses the word seed, that you will have many, many descendants. And then number three, he promises blessing. He promises that he will bless Abraham, but he also promises that through Abraham, all of the nations of the world will be blessed. He promises Abraham that he would make his name great, that he would make him into a new nation. But this idea that through Abraham and through his descendants, the entire world would be blessed. This is the big theme that, again, is going to drive the story all the way into where Christ is going to come as a fulfillment, as the descendant of Abraham, who does provide blessings for all of the world. Notice God also tags on another comment. He also tells Abraham that I will bless those that bless you and will curse those that curse you. And this is going to be a reality that's going to play out, especially in the next session when we get the Israelites in Egypt. So now God tells Abraham to get up and to go. He goes to the land of Canaan. And when he shows up there in Genesis 12:7, God restates his promise, where he says, to your descendants, then I will give this land. Now, keep in mind that at the beginning, Abraham doesn't really have any of these things. God promises him a land. He doesn't have a land. God promises him numerous descendants. Abraham doesn't even have any kids at all at this particular point. So the promise of God is a little bit outrageous even to Abraham, and miraculous and spectacular what God has promised to him. So when we get to Genesis 15, what's going to happen in 15 is God is going to formalize these promises into a covenant. Now, what's happened here is that God has made these promises in Genesis 12. A covenant is a term that means a contract, and it's a formalized contract. So it's kind of a legal, formal contract. That's the way we're going to use the word covenant. And God's going to come in Genesis 15 to Abraham, and he's going to formalize this promise. Now, what happens at the beginning of Genesis 15 is that Abraham has been in some conflict with some kings around him. We saw this in Genesis 14. And so at the end, he has resolved that. God has helped him. But as Genesis 15 opens up, then Abraham seems to be afraid. And in 15:1, God says, do not be afraid, Abram. I'm your shield, your very great reward. And then Abraham responds back here in 15:2 and 3 and says, well, you've promised me descendants, but I don't have any descendants. He says, I don't have any children. And right now, if I die, he said, a servant in my household will be my heir. So he's kind of questioning God's promise that God would give him this numerous descendants. So in 15:4, then God takes him outside. He says, no, this servant in your household will not be your heir. He takes him outside, 15:5, looks up at the skies at night. He says, look at the stars. And I assume this is a situation, he's far from any city lights, and there's no smog and there's no clouds. He's one of those places where you can spectacularly see all the stars, even that big Milky Way spreading across, where you can see just thousands and thousands and thousands of stars. And in that situation, God says, look at the stars. This is the way your descendants will be, if you can count them. Too many to count. And we have this very important verse in 15:6, then, when it says, Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord credited it to him as righteousness. And what we see in this verse introduced is the important role that faith is going to play. God has made him a promise that his descendants will be as numerous as the stars. Abraham now believes what God has told him, and God then counts that to him as righteousness. And this is a theme we're going to see running throughout the Bible, and Paul in the New Testament will pick up on this and expound on this, that righteousness comes through faith, not through keeping the law, and the important role that faith plays. So here, Abraham believes this incredible promise that God has given him, and God accounts that to righteousness. God then points to the land and says, well, let's talk about the land promise as well. I'm also going to give you this land. And Abraham questions that in verse 8 as well. How will I know that I will gain possession of the land? So now here, starting in verse 9, chapter 15, God is going to institute this covenant, formalize it with a ceremony. In the ancient world, sometimes they would establish covenants. Someone might bring an animal, cut the animal in half, and then they would both walk between these two animals that had been cut in half. And what this said was that may this happen to us if we break the covenant. Seems to be the point of cutting these animals in half and passing through the middle. So God has Abraham bring several animals, cut them in half, and spread them apart. And then suddenly it's not both parties that walk through this, the animals, but God himself. Only God himself, this burning fiery flame, comes through and moves through these animals that have been cut apart. And God then is binding himself to this covenant. This means this is a very unusual covenant, that there doesn't seem to be any official binding or obligation to Abraham. Now, God is going to call on Abraham to be obedient, of course, but God is the one that drives the covenant. It's a covenant of grace where God himself has unilaterally committed himself to fulfilling the covenant, these promises, land, descendants, blessing, and through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. So what happens then in Genesis 17, God will restate this covenant one more time to Abraham. Abraham's now an old man, he's 99 years old. God appears again and tells him that he will indeed establish this great covenant. He tells Abraham to walk before me, and be blameless. And what we see introduced now in chapter 17 is God is going to bring in a statement where he says, of your descendants, that I will be their God. And so we start to see this statement in the relationship where God will say, I will be your God, you will be my people, and I will be with you, or I will dwell in your midst and be with you. Now, of course, Abraham's going to go on. We know he has children, and we're going to track those, that Isaac will come and we'll track the rest of Genesis. It's going to track the lives of his children. But we want to touch on the idea of covenants now that it's been introduced to us in Genesis. We see that there are 4 major biblical covenants that are going to play out throughout the Old Testament. And the first one is this one, the Abrahamic covenant. It's a unilateral, one-sided covenant. God promises that he'll fulfill it. We call this a covenant of grace. The next one's going to be very different, the Mosaic covenant, which we'll cover in the next session, that God will make a covenant with the children of Israel. This is found in Leviticus and Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the terms by which they can live in the promised land and be blessed. But this covenant has got 2 sides of it. In Deuteronomy, God says, if you obey these commandments, there will be a wonderful blessing. But if you don't, and if you disobey, then there will be punishment and there will be curses, and you will even could lose the promised land. And so there's responsibility. So we call this a 2-sided covenant, kind of a mutual obligation covenant. And then when we get to the New Testament, Paul is going to make a big contrast between the Abrahamic covenant, which he calls grace, and the Mosaic covenant, which he is going to call the law. The Davidic covenant is also more of a one-sided covenant where God comes and promises. This is in 2 Samuel 7. God will promise that David will have a descendant, a royal descendant. There will be a king who will come and who will reign forever. And that's also more of a one-sided covenant. And then the new covenants where God promises that God will make a new covenant because the old covenant's broken, and that the new covenant will be where God puts his teaching, right in the hearts, and then people will be forgiven, that there will be forgiveness. And the new covenant is what's picked up by Jesus Christ and inaugurated when you get to the New Testament. So we see these covenants playing out against each other theologically, that the Abrahamic covenant is going to drive the story as God continues to bless Abraham and move towards using Abraham to bless all the peoples of the world. It's a covenant of grace. The Mosaic covenant is going to represent the covenant of law, and we're going to see Israel failing to keep that covenant of the law. So what does God do? He reaches back to the covenant of grace with Abraham, reaches back to his covenant he makes with David, and in those covenants of grace, then he creates this new covenant that we see fulfilled in Jesus Christ, as that covenant covers the New Testament era. So the covenant now is going to continue as to Abraham's descendants. And so in your head, okay, as you're kind of thinking through what's the rest of Genesis, we saw at the beginning of Genesis creation, and then we saw the 4 mishaps by people. Abraham's been introduced. He's a major character. God makes the Abrahamic covenant with him, chapter 12, chapter 15, chapter 17, establishes that covenant. Now, Abraham's going to have a son named Isaac. Isaac's going to have a son named Jacob, but Jacob's going to have 12 sons. So kind of get this in your head. This is what's going to cover the rest of the story as we move on through the rest of Genesis. So let's spend a few minutes on each of those. That as this covenant, God is going to restate the covenant to each of the descendants of Abraham, this next 3 generations. God continues that covenant relationship with them. At first with Isaac, he restates it very clearly with the core elements of the covenant, the land, the numerous descendants, and then the blessings. Another thing we're going to start to see now is God will identify himself with Abraham. He will tell Isaac, I am the God of your father Abraham, Genesis 26:24. And we'll see this identifying characteristic of God repeated over and over throughout the Old Testament. And as the patriarchs, the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob patriarchs get added, they will be included. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we will see later on in the Old Testament. So this identification and continuity where God proclaims that he is the God of Abraham. The second, that God proclaims to Isaac that I will be with you. And he states again, that's in 26:3, says it again in 26:24. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. And now we see the presence of God is going to start to become a very important aspect. Remember in Genesis 1 and 2, God was in the garden with Adam and Eve, and they joined the presence of God. It was part of their relationship with God. When they got kicked out of the garden, one of the terrible consequences is they lost their relationship with this close presence of God. One of the things the Bible is working towards, what God is working towards, is to restore that wonderful presence of God. So he promises them, not only will I be your God and you'll be my people, but I will be with you. And he promises this presence. Notice that in the New Testament, when we turn the page from Malachi to Matthew, that Jesus is called Emmanuel. God is with us. And so this idea of God being with us is going to be a major thing that runs from Genesis all the way through the Old Testament into the New Testament all the way, and then climaxes in the book of Revelation. So Isaac has, 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. Even though Jacob's the younger of the 2, he's the one that God chooses to be the one through whom the covenant continues. God's going to change his name to Israel in 35:10, and this is where the nation of Israel gets its name. When we get to the book of Exodus, Jacob's descendants, he's going to have 12 sons, and they're going to call them the sons of Israel by Jacob's new name. So Jacob's name is going to be interchangeable. Sometimes they'll call him Israel, sometimes they'll call him Jacob. But as you get into the book of Exodus, the sons of Israel, most of our English translations will just translate that as the Israelites. And so Jacob's going to be blessed with 12 sons. And remember, there's a long list of them: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. But one of them then is Joseph. And you remember Joseph's the guy with the coat. You remember the story, okay? The many-colored coat. So these sons are out with Joseph. And Joseph is going to be, his brothers are envious towards him, remember, and they are going to sell him into slavery. They sell them to a group of people who are going into Egypt, and Jacob now gets carried into slavery in Egypt. There, the story in the final chapters of Genesis from 37 to 50 deals with Jacob and his 12 sons, but there's a particular focus on what happens with Joseph. And so Joseph goes down into slavery. Now remember that part of the promise that God made to Abraham, that I will bless those that bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And we're going to see this blessing play out in Joseph's life down there in Egypt. That Joseph goes down into Egypt, and the Egyptians recognize the ability that he has, and he gets elevated to a high position. He is going to save Egypt. Egypt is going to be blessed through through Joseph, as he is elevated. So we see blessing those who bless you being played out in the Egyptians. We're going to see this whole thing go in reverse when we get to Exodus. When the Egyptians turn against the Israelites, then they're not going to get blessings, but they're going to get these terrible curses through these plagues. This will be in our next session. So Joseph rises to a high level and a high status in Egypt, and a famine does indeed come. And at the end, then his brothers, his family, comes to Egypt, looking for deliverance, looking for food so they can survive this famine. And Joseph, who now has the power to put them in prison or do whatever he wants, forgives them. One of the more powerful scenes that we see in the Old Testament, he forgives his brothers and his family who had sold him into slavery. He welcomes them back. The family is now settled in Egypt. And at the end of the book of Genesis, then Joseph is going to restate this promise. He says, God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So right here at the end of Genesis, we have the whole family down in Egypt. Joseph is reminding them that God is going to fulfill his promise to Abraham, and that he will take them to the promised land, and they will indeed be the promised land. And then the book ends now while they're still in Egypt. Genesis ends. This is going to lead us, of course, into the next story. When we get into Exodus, that will be our next lesson. Well, what we see here as we review what's happened, the wonderful creation that God makes, the crisis that happens when they're disobedient and they get kicked out of the promised land. And now God's starting to work towards restitution. God, with his great plan of salvation, starts with Abraham. He's going to work it out through this one family, and they're going to become a nation and a tribe, the Hebrews. God is going to bring in other nations along the way, but primarily now he's tracking the Hebrews through the descendants of Abraham, and he makes this covenant, that a promise of land, a promise of descendants, a promise of blessing that's going to drive the Old Testament story. And he's going to also say that through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. And this is going to include not just Abraham and his family, but this blessing to all of the nations, through all of the world, regathering those scattered groups from Genesis 10 and 11. And then this is going to come and find its climax when Jesus Christ comes and actually provides the way of salvation. So things that we learn from this, of course, is that God has his plan. He has his covenant. It's a covenant of grace that we identify with the people in Genesis 3 to 11. We sin against God. We make mistakes. We err. We create a separation between us and God because of what we've done. But God, in his grace, takes the initiative, and he has approached us with this wonderful promise of salvation and this blessing, which he started with Abraham. He brings this to fulfillment in Jesus Christ, and now he offers that wonderful salvation to us through Jesus Christ in fulfillment to this wonderful covenant and promise that he made with Abraham here in these opening chapters, Genesis 12, 15, and 17. Welcome back. This is chapter 3, the calling out.
Whoop, sorry about that. All right, you guys ready to dive into Genesis 12?
Let's do it. Wait, well, go ahead.
Genesis 12. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you." When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. "What have you done to me?" he said. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. Genesis 13. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, "Look around from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. Genesis 14. At the time when Amraphel was king of Shinar, Arioch king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer king of Elam, and Tidal king of Goyim, these kings went to war against Bera king of Sodom, Birsha king of Gomorrah, Shinab king of Admah, Shemeber king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these latter kings joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Dead Sea Valley. For 12 years they had been subject to Chedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings allied with him went out and defeated the Rephaites in Ashtoreth Karnaim, the Zerzites in Ham, the Emites in Shaveh Kiriathaim, and the Horites in the hill country of Seir, as far as El Paran near the desert. Then they turned back and went to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and they conquered the whole territory of the Amalekites, as well as the Amorites who were living in Hazazon Tamar. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, marched out and drew up their battle lines in the valley of Siddim against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goyim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some of the men fell into them, and the rest fled to the hills. The 4 kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food. Then they went away. They also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, since he was living in Sodom. A man who had escaped came and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. Now Abram was living near the great trees of Mamre, the Amorite, a brother of Eshcol, and Aner, all of whom were allied with Abram. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan. During the night, Abram divided his men to attack them, and he routed them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. He recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions, together with the women and the other people. After Abram returned from defeating Chedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. The king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the people and keep the goods for yourself." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, with raised hand, "I have sworn an oath to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, 'I made Abram rich.' I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten, and the share that belongs to the men who went with me, to Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them have their share." Genesis 15. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." But Abram said, "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus." And Abram said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." Then the word of the Lord came to him, "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. He also said to him, "I am the Lord, who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it." But Abram said, "Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?" So the Lord said to him, "Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, a along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. Genesis 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to a husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your slave is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from? And where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant. You will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me, for she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It is still there, between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Genesis 17. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, as for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. Then God said to Abraham, as for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised. including those born in your household or bought with money from a foreigner, those who are not your offspring. Whether born in your household or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. God also said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. When he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him. On that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael, and all those born in his household or bought with his money, every male in his household, and circumcised them, as God told him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. Abraham and his son Ishmael were both circumcised on that very day. Every male in Abraham's household, including those born in his household or bought from a foreigner, was circumcised with him. Genesis 18. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, if I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed, and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant. Very well, they answered, do as you say. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. Quick, he said, get 3 seahs of the finest flour, and knead it, and bake some bread. Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. Where's your wife, Sarah? They asked him. There, in the tent, he said. Then one of them said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Now, Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, yes, you did laugh. When the men got up to leave, they looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. The men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Then Abraham spoke up again. Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5 people? If I find 45 there, he said, I will not destroy it. Once again he spoke to him. What if only 40 are found there? He said, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there? He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Abraham said, now that I've been so bold as to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found there? He said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found there? He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. Genesis 19. The 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we will spend the night in the square. But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, no, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them, but don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof. Get out of our way, they replied. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them. They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness, so that they could not find the door. The 2 men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, sons-in-laws, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry.
Not used to this much usage.
Lord, I can't find the door. The 2 men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, sons-in-laws, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city. But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished. When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, flee for your lives, don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away. But Lot said to them, No, my lords, please, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared. He said to him, Very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it. That is why the town was called Zoar. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. Lot and his 2 daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. One day the older daughter said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine, and then sleep with him, and preserve our family line through our father. That night they got their father to drink wine, and the older daughter went in and slept with him. He was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. The next day the older daughter said to the younger, Last night I slept with my father. Let's get him to drink wine again tonight, and you go in and sleep with him so we can preserve our family line through our father. So they got their father to drink wine that night also. And the younger daughter went in and slept with him. Again, he was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. The older daughter had a son, and she named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites up to today. The younger daughter also had a son, and she named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites up to today. Genesis 20. Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, She is my sister. Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman. Now Abimelech had not gone near her. So he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, She is my sister? And didn't she also say, He is my brother? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands. Then God said to him in the dream, Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all who belong to you will die. Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, What have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should never be done. And Abimelech asked Abraham, What was your reason for doing this? Abraham replied, I said to myself, There is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, This is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, He is my brother. Then Abimelech brought sheep and cattle, and male and female slaves, and gave them to Abraham, and he returned Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, My land is before you, live wherever you like. To Sarah he said, I am giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech his wife and his female slaves so they could have children again. for the Lord had kept all the women in Abimelech's household from conceiving because of Abraham's wife, Sarah. Genesis 21. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bowshot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me in the country where you now reside as a foreigner the same kindness I have shown to you. Abraham said, I swear it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you have set apart by themselves? He replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. So that place was called Beersheba, because the 2 men swore an oath there. After the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the eternal God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. Genesis 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son, Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and wood are here, Isaac said. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba. And Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Sometime later, Abraham was told, Milcah is also a mother. She has borne sons to your brother Nahor. Uz, the firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Kesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. Milcah bore these 8 sons to Abraham's brother Nahor. His concubine, whose name was Rumah, also had sons, Teba, Gaham, Tahash, and Makah. Genesis 23. Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites. He said, I am a foreigner and stranger among you. Sell me some property for a burial site here so I can bury my dead. The Hittites replied to Abraham, Sir, listen to us. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will refuse you his tomb for burying your dead. Then Abraham rose and bowed down before the people of the land, the Hittites. He said to them, If you are willing to let me bury my dead, then listen to me and intercede with Ephron, son of Zohar, on my behalf. So he will sell me the cave of Machpelah, which belongs to him and is at the end of his field. Ask him to sell it to me for the full price as a burial site among you. Ephron the Hittite was sitting among his people, and he replied to Abraham in the hearing of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of his city. No, my lord, he said, listen to me. I give you the field, and I'll give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Again, Abraham bowed down before the people of the land, and he said to Ephron in their hearing, Listen to me, if you will. I will pay the price of the field. Accept it from me so I can bury my dead there. Ephron answered Abraham, Listen to me, my lord. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. But what is that between you and me? Bury your dead. Abraham agreed to Ephron's terms and weighed out for him the price he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weight current among the merchants. So Ephron's field in Machpelah, near Mamre, both the field and the cave in it and all the trees within the borders of the field, was deeded to Abraham as his property in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of the city. Afterward, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave in the field of Machpelah, near Mamre, which is at Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave in it were deeded to Abraham by the Hittites as a burial site. Genesis 24. Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. The serpent asked him, what if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from? Make sure that you do not take my son back there, Abraham said. The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angel before you, so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham, and swore an oath to him concerning this matter. Then the servant left, taking with him 10 of his master's camels, loaded with all kinds of good things from his master. He set out for Aram Naharaim, and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time the women go out to draw water. Then he prayed, Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today, and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I'm standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, please let down your jar that I may have a drink, and she says, drink, and I'll water your camels too, let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The woman was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever slept with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, please give me a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring weighing a beka, and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. Then he asked, whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She answered him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son that Milcah bore to Nahor. And she added, we have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night. Then the man bowed down and worshipped the Lord, saying, praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives. The young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things. Now Rebekah had a brother named Laban, and he hurried out to the man at the spring. As soon as he had seen the nose ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms, and had heard Rebekah tell what the man said to her, he went out to the man and found him standing by the camels near the spring. Come, you who are blessed by the Lord, he said. Why are you standing out here? I have prepared the house and a place for the camels. So the man went to the house, and the camels were unloaded. Straw and fodder were brought for the camels, and water for him and his men to wash their feet. Then food was set before him, but he said, I will not eat until I have told you what I have to say. Then tell us, Laban said. So he said, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has blessed my master abundantly, and he has become wealthy. He has given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male and female servants, and camels and donkeys. My master's wife Sarah has borne him a son in her old age, and he has given him everything he owns. And my master made me swear an oath and said, you must not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I live, but go to my father's family, into my own clan, and get a wife for my son. Then I asked my master, what if the woman will not come back with me? He replied, the Lord, before whom I have walked faithfully, will send his angel with you and make your journey a success. so that you can get a wife for my son from my own clan and from my father's family. You will be released from my oath if, when you go to my clan, they refuse to give her to you. Then you will be released from my oath. When I came to the spring today, I said, Lord, God of my master Abraham, if you will, please grant success to the journey on which I have come. See, I am standing beside this spring. If a young woman comes out to draw water and I say to her, please let me drink a little water from your jar, and if she says to me, drink, and I'll draw water for your camels too, let her be the one the Lord has chosen for my master's son. Before I finished praying in my heart, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She went down to the spring and drew water, and I said to her, please give me a drink. She quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, drink, and I'll water your camels too. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. I asked her, whose daughter are you? She said, the daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him. Then I put the ring in her nose and the bracelet on her arms, and I bowed down and worshipped the Lord. I praised the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me on the right road to get the granddaughter of my master's brother for his son. Now, if you will show kindness and faithfulness to my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, so I may know which way to turn. Laban and Bethuel answered, this is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed. When Abraham's servant heard what they said, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. Then the servant brought out gold and silver jewelry and articles of clothing and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave costly gifts to her brother and to her mother. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night there. When they got up the next morning, he said, send me on my way to my master. But her brother and her mother replied, let the young woman remain with us 10 days or so, then you may go. But he said to them, do not detain me, now that the Lord has granted success to my journey. Send me on my way so I may go to my master. Then they said, let's call the young woman and ask her about it. So they called Rebekah and asked her, will you go with this man? I will go, she said. So they sent their sister Rebekah on her way, along with her nurse and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the cities of their enemies. Then Rebekah and her attendants got ready and mounted the camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebekah and left. Now Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi, where he was living in the Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate, and as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from a camel and asked the servant, who is that man in the field coming to meet us? He is my master, the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Genesis 25. Abraham had taken another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan. The descendants of Dedan were the Asherites, the Letushites, and the Leumites. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldaah. All these were descendants of Keturah. Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac, but while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Abraham lived 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron, son of Zoar the Hittite, the field Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Beer Lahai Roi. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Ishmael. whom Sarah's slave Hagar the Egyptian bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, listed in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Dumah, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These were the sons of Ishmael, and these are the names of the 12 tribal rulers according to their settlement in camps. Ishmael lived 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people. His descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt as you go toward Ashur, and they lived in hostility toward all the tribes related to them. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Padam Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two people from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Genesis 26. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the previous famine in Abraham's time. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and will give them all these lands. And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him, keeping my commands, my decrees, and my instructions." So Isaac stayed in Gerar. When the men of that place asked him about his wife, he said, "She is my sister," because he was afraid to say, "She is my wife." He thought the men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah, because she is beautiful. When Isaac had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked down from a window and saw Isaac caressing his wife Rebekah. So Abimelech summoned Isaac and said, "She is really your wife. Why did you say she is my sister?" Isaac answered him, "Because I thought I might lose my life on account of her." Then Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the men might well have slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech gave orders to all the people, "Anyone who harms this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." Isaac planted crops in that land, and the same year reaped 100-fold, because the Lord blessed him. The man became rich, and his wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. He had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Move away from us. You have become too powerful for us." So Isaac moved away from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar, where he settled. Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham died, and he gave them the same names his father had given them. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and discovered a well of fresh water there. But the herders of Gerar quarreled with those of Isaac and said, "The water is ours." So he named the well Esek, because they disputed with him. Then they dug another well, but they quarreled over that one also. So he named it Sitnah. He moved on from there and dug another well, and no one quarreled over it. He named it Rehoboth, saying, now the Lord has given us room, and we will flourish in the land. From there he went up to Beersheba. That night the Lord appeared to him and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and will increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. Isaac built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord. There he pitched his tent, and there his servants dug a well. Meanwhile, Abimelech had come to him from Gerar with Ahuzath, his personal advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his forces. Isaac asked them, why have you come to me, since you were hostile to me and sent me away? They answered, we saw clearly that the Lord was with you, so we said there ought to be a sworn agreement between us and you. Let us make a treaty with you that you will do us no harm, just as we did not harm you, but always treated you well and sent you away peacefully. And now you are blessed by the Lord. Isaac then made a feast for them, and they ate and drank. Early the next morning, the men swore an oath to each other, and Isaac sent them on their way, and they went away peacefully. That day, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug. They said, we found water. He called it Sheba, and to this day, the name of the town has been Beersheba. When Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, and also Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittite. They were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Genesis 27. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, my son, here I am, he answered. Isaac said, I am now an old man, and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die. Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies. Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, but my brother Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him, and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing. His mother said to him, my son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother. And she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son, Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the goat skins. Then she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she had made. He went to his father and said, my father? Yes, my son, he answered. Who is it? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing. Isaac asked his son, how did you find it so quickly, my son? The Lord your God gave me success, he replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not. Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy, like those of his brother Esau. So he proceeded to bless him. Are you really my son Esau? He asked. I am, he replied. Then he said, my son, bring me some of your game to eat, so that I may give you my blessing. Jacob brought it to him, and he ate. And he brought some wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, come here, my son, and kiss me. So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you, and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. After Isaac finished blessing him, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. He too prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. Then he said to him, "My father, please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." His father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I am your son," he answered, "your firstborn, Esau." Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me, me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? This is the second time he's taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" Isaac answered Esau, "I have made him lord over you, and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father." Then Esau wept aloud. His father Isaac answered him, "Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck." Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." When Rebekah was told what her older son Esau had said, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Your brother Esau is planning to avenge himself by killing you. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides. When your brother is no longer angry with you and forgets what you did to him, I'll send word for you to come back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" Then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I'm disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living." Genesis 28. So Isaac called for Jacob and blessed him. Then he commanded him, "Do not marry a Canaanite woman. Go at once to Padan Aram, to the house of your mother's father Bethuel. Take a wife for yourself there, from among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you, and make you fruitful, and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. May he give you and your descendants the blessing given to Abraham, so that you may take possession of the land where you now reside as a foreigner, the land God gave to Abraham." Then Isaac sent Jacob on his way, and he went to Padan Aram, to Laban, son of Bethuel the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, who was the mother of Jacob and Esau. Now Esau learned that Isaac had blessed Jacob and had sent him to Padan Aram to take a wife from there, and that when he blessed him, he commanded him, "Do not marry a Canaanite woman," and that Jacob had obeyed his father and mother and had gone to Padan Aram. Esau then realized how displeasing the Canaanite women were to his father Isaac. So he went to Ishmael and married Mahalath, the sister of Nebaioth, and daughter of Ishmael, son of Abraham, in addition to the wives he already had. Jacob left to Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." He was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I'm taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. Genesis 29. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the open country, with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, my brothers, where are you from? We're from Haran, they replied. He said to them, do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson? Yes, we know him, they answered. Then Jacob asked them, is he well? Yes, he is, they said. And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep. Look, he said, the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture. We can't, they replied, until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep. While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, you are my own flesh and blood. After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, my time is completed, and I want to make love to her. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? Laban replied, it is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, it is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too. So she named him Simeon. Again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. So he was named Levi. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, this time I will praise the Lord. So she named him Judah. Then she stopped having children. Genesis 30.
Well, that's about all we have time for today. Good stuff, huh?
Yeah.
Any thoughts briefly that anyone wants to share? We got about 4 minutes. Well, Father, we thank you for this time. God, we just pray that we will hold on to what we received from you. Keep us close to you, Jesus, this evening. Keep us abiding in your presence, Lord. In Jesus' name.
I've often wondered, why couldn't he, pull back that blessing that was delivered to the wrong sign, and deliver the correct blessing to the correct sign? I've often wondered that.
I don't know. He
So
already-
you just
he already
even
spoke it
utilize
out.
me.
Said he already spoke it out, I guess. I mean,
Yeah,
um.
yeah, but
It's,
he was deceived, so.
It's
I don't-
spoken out, a covenant is a covenant.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna pretend to understand it, but it seems like a form of prophecy. And, I don't know, it's
Again, what are
maybe
the-
once he spoke it, he couldn't take it back, like any of our
again,
words.
You know, how do I bring that forward? Oops, sorry. How you? Bring it
Well-
to this city.
Yeah, I think what we're gonna see with, Balaam. But later on in Numbers, he's a prophet and he's offered, a lot of payment to curse the Israelites. And, he says, well, I can only speak what God says. So I believe that God orchestrated those things, and it was God's will for Isaac to bless Jacob in that way, even if the way that Jacob behaved wasn't right. God was still working in all of those things for his will to be accomplished.
Or maybe, yeah, I follow through on my promises,
Yeah.
you know, once
Well,
I
he's
completely didn't, yeah, he's scared he always follows through on it.
But I just think there's something cool about blessing that we need to learn. I believe we're supposed to be blessing each other, and those words that we speak over each other. We don't tend to think that way. We kind of think, I think our modern culture at least thinks that is kind of superstitious, or, just doesn't really have a framework for that. But when we speak in agreement with God, it's powerful and it matters. So, all right.